Are we past the golden age of solo gaming, or is it just the beginning? To answer that, we need to trace solo gaming's surprising evolution, from the chambers of a French princess to the table in front of you today. Before we dive in, tell me, what was the first solo game that hooked you? Drop it in the comments. What if I told you the first record of a solo board game wasn't in a dusty math book or a monk's journal, but in the private chambers of a French princess? In 1697, visitors to the lavish court of Princess de Soubise noticed an unusual little puzzle sitting among the silks and jewels. A board studded with pegs, with one space left empty. That puzzle was Peg Solitaire. She didn't invent it. The game had likely been circulating in French society already, but she's the reason we know it existed at that time. It became famous simply because it was spotted in her chambers and written down. And that single note in history gives us our first recorded glimpse of solo gaming. At first glance, it looks simple. Just jump pegs until only one remains. But in practice, a single wrong move dooms the puzzle. By the time you realize your mistake, you're staring at a board full of stranded pegs. Unsolvable, unfixable. The elegance lies in its precision. Now imagine the scene. Court gossip and music drift through the halls of Versailles. But inside her chambers, the princess leans over a puzzle that demands silence and concentration. In a world of constant spectacle, Peg Solitaire offered a rare chance for private focus. And here's the takeaway. The very first snapshot of solo gaming in history wasn't about competition or spectacle or wealth. It was about something timeless. The quiet satisfaction of challenging yourself, alone, with nothing but your own mind to rely on. So why did a handful of pegs feel so impossible? Picture a cross-shaped board with 33 holes. Into 32 of them are marbles or pegs, leaving just one empty space. At first glance, it looks harmless, almost inviting like a child's toy. The rules? Simple enough. Jump one peg over another, just like in checkers, and remove the piece you leapt over. Keep going until no moves remain. The perfect solution leaves you with a single peg sitting triumphantly in the center of the board. Sounds easy, right? But here's the trap. Peg Solitaire is less about what you can do and more about what you shouldn't do. A single careless jump can strand your pieces in the wrong places, creating a dead end that's impossible to recover from. Many beginners end with 6 or 7 pegs scattered around, wondering where it all went wrong. This puzzle is part logic, part foresight, and part self-discipline. Like a Sudoku grid or a tricky chess problem, it requires planning several moves ahead. Every jump narrows your future possibilities, and the further you go, the more punishing each mistake becomes. And that's why Peg Solitaire endures. It lures you in with the promise of simplicity, then humbles you with its unforgiving nature. Some of the greatest games don't need complex rules or flashy components to create tension. Sometimes, all it takes is a few pegs, a single empty space, and the razor's edge between success and failure. What happens to a puzzle after 300 years? Sometimes, it reincarnates in surprising ways. Peg Solitaire may feel like a relic of gilded French chambers, but its DNA is alive and well in modern gaming. One of its most direct descendants? Ricochet robots. At first glance, the two couldn't look more different. Wooden pegs on a cross-shaped board versus bright little robots scattered across a futuristic grid. But the challenge is strikingly familiar. No dice, no luck, no opponents. Just pure spatial logic. In Ricochet robots, your task is to move a colored robot to a target square. Sounds easy, until you realize the robots don't stop until they slam into a wall or another robot. Suddenly, the board becomes a maze of possibilities, each move creating a chain reaction you have to visualize out to its very last before deciding if it's the right move to make. Like Peg Solitaire, every move in Ricochet robots has weight. One hasty slide can trap you in a mess of inefficiency, while the perfect sequence feels like uncovering a hidden path only you could see. Both games demand patience, foresight, and the discipline to see patterns others might miss. And here's the real blueprint. Across centuries, the same logic challenge still pulls us in. Princess de Soubise studied her pegs. Today, we wrestle with robots. The aesthetics evolved, but the heartbeat is the same. The joy of unraveling a puzzle that refuses to yield easily. What's the most played game in human history? No, it's not chess, not Monopoly, not even Peg Solitaire. The crown probably belongs to a humble deck of cards, because at some point, almost everyone has played a form of solitaire. Klondike, Spider, Free Cell, take your pick. Unlike Peg Solitaire with its carved wooden boards and royal history, Card Solitaire didn't need wealth or craftsmanship to spread. All it took was a standard deck of 52 cards and a little patience. That's what made it universal. Anyone, anywhere can play. Soldiers in trenches, travelers on ships, families at kitchen tables. Solitaire wasn't just a pastime of the elite, it was the puzzle of the people. And then, in 1990, it jumped from the table to the screen. When Microsoft bundled Solitaire with Windows 3.0, it wasn't just a free game, it was a how to use a mouse tutorial. Millions learned to drag, drop, and double-click by stacking digital cards. By some estimates, billions of hours of work productivity were lost to those pixelated decks. But more importantly, Solitaire became one of the first truly global digital games, turning a centuries-old pastime into a household computer ritual. And its legacy is still alive. Modern games like Onirim echo that meditative loop of building order out of shuffled chaos, while my own design, Singularity, takes the same DNA into deep space. You're no longer stacking cards, you're a black hole consuming a messy galaxy and bending it into order. Deck builders such as Slay the Spire carry the same addictive rhythm. Draw, play, reshuffle, repeat. Always wrestling randomness into something that feels controlled. Here's the takeaway. Solitaire's true magic wasn't just its simplicity. It was its role in laying the groundwork for solo play as part of everyday life. From soldiers in trenches to office workers on Windows PCs, Solitaire proved that solo gaming could be universal, accessible, and endlessly replayable. Passed down from mothers to children and shared across generations, it set the standard for how solo games could endure across both time and medium. Before board games filled shelves, people turned to puzzles on paper. In the 19th and 20th centuries, afternoons were consumed by crossword books, riddles, and logic grids. The first crossword puzzle, published in 1913, sparked a craze. Commuters filled grids on trains, office workers scribbled in margins, and families raced to finish the Sunday paper. Logic puzzles soon followed, teaching players to track if this, then that scenarios, until the solution finally emerged. What these puzzles really did was train deductive thinking. They weren't just pastimes, they were exercises in weighing options, ruling things out, and stitching truth together step by step. That detective-like DNA is everywhere in modern solo gaming. Take Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. It's basically a giant crossword puzzle in disguise. You sift through newspapers, connect clues, and build a solution piece by piece. Chronicles of Crime updates the tradition with QR codes and an app, pulling you into a living logic grid where suspects and evidence overlap in ways that demand careful deduction. And if you love wordplay, Paperback Adventures transforms Crosswords into a roguelike, where building words powers combat, exploration, and survival. It's literally Crosswords with hit points. Here's the takeaway. Deduction puzzles evolve seamlessly into modern solo games, whether in grids, mysteries, or word-building roguelikes. They pass down the same timeless skill, teaching players how to think like detectives. Up until the 1980s, most solo play was about tidy puzzles. Peg jumps, crosswords, card stacks, or deduction grids. They were all about finding the solution. But in 1981, a game called Barbarian Prince landed on tables, and it changed everything. Instead of solving a puzzle, you were thrown into a sprawling wilderness with one directive: survive. The map sprawled with mountains, rivers, and towns. Every decision, whether to risk a cursed swamp or seek allies in a village, branched into new events. No two journeys were the same, and suddenly solo play wasn't just about solving problems, but about living a story. This was solo gaming's first real narrative and sandbox feel, the paper and dice ancestor of today's open world board games. You can trace its influence in modern epics like Sleeping Gods or Seventh Continent, where sprawling maps invite you to wander, explore, and carve out your own narrative path. Just like in Barbarian Prince, every decision ripples outward, creating a personal story only you will experience. The takeaway. With Barbarian Prince, solo gaming grew. It proved that one player could experience an open-ended, emergent adventure entirely on their own. No puzzle to solve, no fixed path, just freedom. That spirit of exploration and branching possibilities still drives today's biggest solo story games. From Sleeping Gods to Seventh Continent, where the map is vast, the choices are yours, and every playthrough tells a different tale. Imagine relaxing on the couch in the 1980s, and instead of reading a book from front to back, the words on the page prompt you to make a decision. If you stay absolutely still so as not to alarm the bear, turn to page 34. If you run for your life, turn to page 61. It wasn't just reading anymore, it was adventure. Gamebooks like Choose Your Own Adventure and Fighting Fantasy cracked open a new frontier. For the first time, players weren't passive readers, they were heroes shaping the story. Dice rolls determined combat, stats tracked your health, gold, or items. The book became a game board, and the story became a labyrinth of choices. Every turn of the page was a leap into the unknown, a monster ambush, a hidden treasure, or a spike pit that forced you to start over. This was solo gaming's great democratization. You didn't need a map sprawling across the table or miniatures scattered across a grid. All you needed was a book and maybe a pair of dice. And just like that, Gamebooks brought the same narrative spark from the table into the hands of an even wider audience. And that legacy is alive today. Look at Tainted Grail, where the storybook format delivers grim legends full of moral choices and dice-driven survival. Or Trudvang Legends, which uses a massive storybook system where your choices dictate the narrative. Quests evolve, and the world remembers your actions, creating a campaign that feels alive with every decision. That lineage is alive in modern narrative games, where event cards now replace page flips, carrying the story into new directions. Here's the takeaway. Gamebooks transformed the player from a puzzle solver into a protagonist, and gaming didn't need to be open-ended to feel personal, even when your options were limited to a handful of numbered pages. The simple act of choosing gave you ownership of the story. That illusion of control, of shaping what happens next, was enough to make the adventure feel like it belonged to you. What if your enemy wasn't even on the board? In 1983, a game called Ambush shocked players by flipping the script. You commanded a squad of soldiers moving cautiously across a map, scanning for danger, and then, suddenly, the ambush happened. Enemies weren't pre-placed. They emerged from hidden rules, triggered by your actions, punishing mistakes in ways that felt terrifyingly real. For the first time, solo gamers had an opponent that felt alive. The game wasn't just a puzzle, it was reacting to you. Every cautious step carried tension. Would a sniper appear from the tree line? Would a machine gun nest open fire across the map? You weren't solving something fixed, you were surviving a system that pushed back. That was the birth of what we now call solo AI. Not artificial intelligence in the digital sense, but rules-driven systems that simulate an opponent's decisions. And that DNA is everywhere today. In Pandemic, the deck-driven infection system creates a rhythm of predictable escalation with unpredictability, forcing you to stay on alert because the next outbreak isn't a question of if, but when. Spirit Island takes that idea further. Colonizers always explore, build, and ravage in sequence, but the randomized cards decide where those threats land, creating constant tension. And in Massive Darkness 2, enemy appearances blend structure with chaos. The Darkness track ensures new threats spawn regularly, portals and chambers trigger fresh mobs, and even treasures can spring surprises. You know the escalation is coming, but not exactly which monster will appear or how the dice will treat you once the fight begins. Here's the takeaway. Ambush was the prototype for modern solo AI. Every event deck, every card, or automated opponent owes a piece of its design to that hidden ambush in 1983. It didn't just add danger, it rewired solo gaming, showing that the system itself could become your opponent. And if that's the kind of opponent that fascinates you, there's more of that to come. And if you're enjoying this history, hit subscribe. There's more content involving the games that you love coming soon. What happens when dial-up internet collides with creativity? In the early 2000s, solo gamers discovered they didn't need publishers or factories to bring their ideas to life. They just needed a printer. Suddenly, anyone with a bit of graphic design skill and imagination could share a fully playable game as a PDF. Print it, cut it out, and you were off on an adventure from your kitchen table. One of the most famous examples was Zombie in My Pocket. It was tiny, just a handful of tiles and cards you could print on regular paper. But it packed in exploration, combat, and survival decisions that kept players coming back for more. It spread like wildfire online, proving that a clever solo design didn't need glossy production to capture attention. This was a turning point. Solo games no longer relied solely on big publishers taking risks. Designers could test, share, and refine directly with the community. Forums buzzed with feedback, house rules, and homemade expansions. For players, it felt like discovering a secret underground library of adventures. Free, accessible, and endlessly inventive. And the impact? Massive. The print and play revolution laid the foundation for today's thriving indie solo scene. Games like Under Falling Skies started as print and plays before being picked up by major publishers. Others, like Iron Helm, skipped Kickstarter entirely. Designer Jason Glover chose the Game Crafter's crowd sale model instead, a system where the more copies sold, the cheaper the price became. No stretch goals, no backer tiers, no corporate hoops, just a direct grassroots way to get a game into players' hands quickly. Here's the takeaway. The internet turned solo gaming into a grassroots movement. Creativity went global, barriers dropped, and for the first time, players and designers were building the future of solo play together. One printer, one PDF, and one homemade adventure at a time. Not every publisher planned for solo play. In fact, through the late 1990s and early 2000s, many of the most popular Euro games, Carcassonne, Agricola, Puerto Rico, shipped without a solo mode at all. But fans weren't willing to accept that. Instead, they started building their own. This became what many called the duct tape era of solo gaming. Online forums buzzed with homemade variants and house rules. Maybe you played Carcassonne against a dummy player that stole tiles. Maybe you gave yourself a limited number of turns in Puerto Rico and compared your score against the chart. Maybe you scripted AI behavior for opponents in Agricola just to feel the pressure of competition. The systems were clunky, unpolished, and often inconsistent, but you played them anyway. And more importantly, they proved the audience was there. Solo gamers weren't just curious, they were passionate and inventive. They wanted to bend games into something playable, even if it meant making the rules up as they went. That grassroots energy carried forward into today's hobby. Many modern publishers now expect to include a solo mode at launch, sometimes even hiring designers who specialize in solo AI. What was once hacked together in forum threads has become a polished, professional part of the design process. Take Lost Ruins of Arnak. Its solo mode runs on a deck of rival action cards that dictate exactly how the rival plays. It blocks worker spaces, climbs the research track, and even simulates overcoming guardians. It doesn't try to think like a human opponent, but it acts as a constant blocker and score chaser, pushing you to adapt. The result is a rival that feels alive, yet only takes seconds to run. Add that to the tense time race in Terraforming Mars, or the Rugwort bot in Everdell, and you can see the leap. From duct tape fan rules to solo systems that feel smooth, challenging, and intentional. For decades, solo gaming lived on scraps, puzzles, house rules, and variants taped together by fans. But in 2011, everything changed. Friedman Freese released Friday, and for the first time in modern board gaming, here was a title designed only for one player. Not a variant, not an optional mode, a game built start to finish for you and you alone. In Friday, you play as Robinson Crusoe's unlikely companion, training him to survive the island. The premise sounds playful, but the gameplay is razor sharp. At its core, Friday is a pure deck builder. You begin with the terrible deck, weak, clumsy, prone to failure, but every defeat lets you trim it down, slowly transforming it into a lean survival machine. Every success adds a card that gives you an option to help defeat the next challenge. Failure hurts, but it also teaches. Every stumble is growth, told not through paragraphs of text, but through the cards in your hand. What made Friday revolutionary wasn't just that it was clever, it was that it took solo players seriously. It was proof that a game could be for one player only and still succeed. And it did. Friday became a cult hit and opened the door for more ambitious designs. Today, that legacy lives on in publisher backlines like Renegade's Solo Hero series, with titles such as Proving Grounds, Warp's Edge, and Reckland Run, all created exclusively for solo play. And it also lives on in indie designs like Maquis, a tense worker placement game where you play members of the French resistance, sneaking across occupied streets, dodging patrols, and risking everything to complete missions against impossible odds. Here's the takeaway. Friday was the breakthrough moment. One small green box that proved just one player was not only enough, it was the start of an unstoppable wave of solo-only design. If Friday was the breakthrough, MageKnight was the masterpiece. Released in 2011 by Vlaja Hvatil, it wasn't just a game, it was a toolkit for adventure. Part deck builder, part exploration, part combat sandbox. MageKnight blended genres in a way no solo game had before. Technically, it plays 1 to 4, but ask most in the solo community and they'll say, this game was built for one. In MageKnight, you step into the boots of a lone hero on a sprawling map of cities, dungeons, and ruins. Your deck represents your skills, movement, combat, spells, and every card has multiple uses. Do you spend a card now for a weaker effect, or hold it for the perfect combo? Do you press through the forest before nightfall, or try to take down that keep first? Every choice ripples outward, shaping not just the turn, but your entire story. What makes MageKnight legendary is its density. It isn't about a simple win or loss. It's about navigating a world that feels alive, with overlapping systems and endless ways to solve problems. You're not just playing a scenario, you're commanding a saga. More than a decade later, it still stands as the gold standard for depth, flexibility, and replayability, though it isn't for everyone, especially new players who hear, "This is the greatest," before sitting down. With expectations sky high, it's easy to walk away underwhelmed and asking what's all the fuss about. But its influence is undeniable. Games like Spirit Island and Too Many Bones carry that same spirit of complex, puzzle-like decision-making where each turn feels monumental. Even lighter titles like Aeon's End echo its DNA, using deck building to simulate evolving powers in an epic solo battle. Here's the takeaway. MageKnight proved solo gaming could be sweeping, complex, and endlessly replayable. It wasn't just filler between multiplayer sessions, it was a hobby centerpiece. For many, it still sits on the throne as the greatest solo design of all time, myself included. Robinson Crusoe made solo survival brutally memorable. Storms, hunger, and poor planning could spiral into ruin at any moment. That same spirit of endurance shows up in Unbroken. a leaner game about clawing your way out of a failed dungeon crawl, wounded and alone. Both remind us that survival is never glamorous. It's a grind. Meanwhile, Navajo Wars carried solo gaming into the realm of historical storytelling. It asked players to guide an entire people through centuries of cultural endurance against overwhelming odds. That lineage finds a modern echo in Halls of Hegra, which challenges you to withstand a Nazi siege in Norway. These designs prove that solo games can be more than puzzles. They can immerse us in lived history, where holding out just one more day is the victory. Around 2015, solo gaming got its biggest breakthrough since Robinson Crusoe, Automa Factory. Founded by Morten Monrad Peterson, it began as a small fan project to create intelligent yet simple AI opponents for Scythe. Instead of just scripting actions, these automas captured the feel of playing against a live opponent. And suddenly, games not originally designed for solo play became accessible in a whole new way. It was a seismic shift. Solo players were no longer an afterthought, but an audience worth designing for. At the same time, Kickstarter was reshaping the landscape. Designers who might never have reached a publisher suddenly had direct access to a growing base of solo-first gamers. Nemo's Wars 2nd Edition returned from relative obscurity to become a crowdfunded hit, delivering a narrative-rich, fully solo experience. Anachrony brought time travel and worker placement together with a challenging solo automa. Wingspan, with its stunning production and engine-building gameplay, became a cultural phenomenon and showed that even more casual-friendly designs could shine solo. And Gaia Project demonstrated that even the heaviest of Euro-style games could deliver a robust solo challenge with automa design. These years created a perfect storm. Automa Factory showed how to retrofit multiplayer designs with satisfying solo modes, while Kickstarter proved a business case. Together they transformed solo board gaming from niche curiosity to mainstream movement. Instead of simply considering a solo mode as an optional add-on, designers began to integrate it as a core component of their games from the very beginning. When the world shut down, solo gaming exploded. What was once niche suddenly became mainstream as dining tables transformed into battlefields, puzzle rooms, and sprawling sagas. Every genre found its audience. For players craving heavy strategic challenges, Imperium Classics and Legends let them shepherd entire civilizations through centuries of growth and collapse. Cozy puzzlers like the Isle of Cats and Calico offered warmth and comfort during long quarantines, while the legendary deck-building system, whether superheroes, aliens, or movie tie-ins, saw renewed life on kitchen tables everywhere. Narrative-driven titles found fresh relevance too. Hostage Negotiator turned tense one-on-one standoffs into repeatable challenges, while its spiritual successor, Final Girl, flipped the formula into horror cinema, becoming one of the most acclaimed true solo designs to date. This was the moment solo gaming broke through. Out of the necessity to stay sane in isolation, the hobby surged, pulling in players who had never once considered gaming alone until the pandemic made it a lifeline. As solo play spread, so too did the voices helping shape and guide it. What once felt like a lonely corner of the hobby suddenly had leaders, teachers, and storytellers. Content creators emerged not just as reviewers, but as companions, helping players navigate rulebooks, discover hidden gems, and celebrate victories that might otherwise have gone unseen. Ricky Royale's playthroughs became legendary, often the very first lifeline for players staring down intimidating rulebooks like MageKnight or Navajo Wars. Liz Davidson, through Beyond Solitaire, offered thoughtful reviews and deep-dive conversations that gave solo play the respect it deserved. And the team at One Stop Co-op Shop built a thriving community around cooperative and solo-first games, offering reviews, tutorials, and podcasts that made sure no one had to face the hobby alone. These voices mattered because they turned isolation into connection. When you set up Marvel Champions on your kitchen table, you could compare strategies with D20 Woodworking, Villain Theory, Daring Lime, or Web Warrior Fanatic. When you struggled trying to find a strategy to overcome Pax Pamir, you could turn to RTFM or Meeple University, who was there with a video guide. The same with Callan North for Spirit Island. And when a new solo mode or game dropped, you didn't have to wonder if it was worth your time. You could watch a playthrough or a review and see for yourself from the people who live and breathe solo play. Totally Tabled, Specifically Solo, or Solo Board Gaming Night. Even when we play alone, we are not alone. The community of solo gamers and the creators who champion them turned solitary play into a shared celebration. One video, one podcast, one playthrough at a time. And for me, that celebration wouldn't be complete without a nod to one of my personal favorites, the Grouchy Nerd.
It's time to learn a game that plays at the ideal player count. 1.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Now get off my lawn.
Today, solo gaming is not just surviving, it's thriving. From sprawling living card games like Marvel Champions to scrappy indie print and plays, designers are increasingly thinking of ways to make sure the solo mode shines. What was once an afterthought has become a design pillar. The golden age isn't fading, it's expanding. Each year brings new experiments, new voices, and new worlds built with the solo player in mind. What began centuries ago as a quiet puzzle in a French palace now stretches across kitchen tables, game rooms, and online communities around the world. So the next time you sit down to play solo, remember this: even though you're a solitary player, you are never alone. And that's the real takeaway here. Whether you're a veteran of these sagas or just a curious newcomer, you're part of something big. Solo gaming isn't a lonely hobby. It's a global community of thinkers and adventurers, all celebrating the magic of a challenge faced alone. If you made it this far, you're clearly into solo gaming, so hit subscribe and stick around. Oh yeah, and by the way, this entire history, I just made it up. Catch you next video.